I pulled into the driveway of my brand-new 3-bedroom colonial home in suburban Denver, fresh from the closing appointment where I had signed the final papers on my dream house. What I saw next made my blood freeze. My parents' black SUV sat in my driveway, and a U-Haul truck was backed up to my front door with 2 men unloading furniture. My sister Bethany emerged from what was supposed to be my house, carrying boxes while her 3 children ran around the front yard like they owned the place. My mother appeared at the doorway waving cheerfully, as if this was completely normal. When I got out of my car, confused and angry, she announced that they were moving in because family helps family, and I didn't need all this space as a single man anyway. I stood there in complete disbelief, watching strangers carry my sister's belongings into my house, while my family acted like this was the most natural thing in the world. Bethany walked over to me with a smug smile, her 7-year-old daughter Emma clinging to her leg, while her twin boys Jake and Tyler, both 9, continued racing around the yard. "Connor, you're finally here," Bethany said as if I was late to some planned event. "We got started without you since you were taking so long at the bank." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising. "This is my house. I just bought it. Why are there moving trucks here?" My father, Frank, appeared from around the back of the U-Haul, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was a stocky man in his 50s who had always believed that being the family patriarch gave him the right to make decisions for everyone else. Behind him walked Derek, my sister's husband, carrying what looked suspiciously like my new 75-inch television that I had delivered here yesterday. "Son, we need to talk." Frank set his tone, suggesting this conversation was going to go exactly how he wanted it to go. Derek lost his job at the warehouse 3 weeks ago, and they're facing eviction from their apartment. Your sister has 3 kids, and you've got all this space you don't need. I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. "Dad, this is my house. I saved for 5 years to buy this place. I didn't agree to let anyone move in with me." My mother, Janet, stepped out onto the front porch, her perfectly styled gray hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She had always been the master manipulator of the family, able to twist any situation to make herself look like the victim or the hero, depending on what served her purposes best. "Connor, honey, don't be selfish," she said in that sweet, condescending tone that had driven me crazy my entire childhood. "When we helped pay for your college, we didn't expect you to forget about family the moment you got successful. Derek's been looking for work everywhere, but the economy is tough right now. That doesn't give you the right to move into my house without asking me." I shot back, my anger building with each word. "How did you even get inside?" Derek smirked, pulling a set of keys from his pocket. "Your mom gave us the spare key you left with her for emergencies. This is an emergency." I remembered giving my mother that key 6 months ago when I was house hunting in case something happened to me and someone needed to check on my apartment. I never imagined she would use it to stage a home invasion. "This is insane," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Janet said calmly, producing a folder from seemingly nowhere. "We have a lease agreement right here with your signature on it. You agreed to let Bethany and her family stay here for 2 years, rent-free until they get back on their feet." She handed me a document that looked official, complete with letterhead and legal language. At the bottom was what appeared to be my signature, though I had absolutely no memory of signing anything like this. The terms were outrageous, giving Bethany's family unlimited access to my home and explicitly stating that I would cover all utilities and maintenance costs. "I never signed this," I said, studying the document more closely. "This is fraud." "Your memory must be going..." "Connor," Bethany said with fake concern. "We talked about this for hours last month when Derek got laid off. You said family comes first and that you'd be happy to help us out." I knew for certain that conversation had never happened, but looking around at my family's confident expressions, I began to doubt my own sanity for a moment. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The moving crew had finished unloading furniture, and I could see through the front door, that they had completely rearranged my house. My brand new sectional sofa had been moved to the garage to make room for Bethany's old furniture. My home office had been converted into a bedroom for the twins, complete with bunk beds and toy boxes. The master bedroom that I had been dreaming about for months now housed Derek and Bethany's king-size bed and matching dresser set. "Where exactly am I supposed to sleep in my own house?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "There's a nice spot in the basement where we set up an air mattress for you," Derek said, not even trying to hide his satisfaction. "It's actually pretty cozy down there. You'll like it." I looked around at my family, searching their faces for any sign of shame or recognition that what they were doing was wrong. Instead, I saw entitlement manipulation and a complete lack of respect for my rights as a human being, let alone as the legal owner of this property. My phone buzzed with a text message from my real estate agent congratulating me on my purchase and asking how the move-in was going. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but I was too angry and shocked to find anything funny about this situation. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "All of you, right now, take your stuff and get out of my house." "Connor, be reasonable," Frank said, stepping closer to me. "These kids need stability. Are you really going to put your own nephews and niece out on the street?" "That's not my responsibility," I replied. "You should have thought about that before you decided to break into my house and forge legal documents." "We'll see what our lawyer has to say about that," Frank said ominously. "Marcus is on his way over here right now to explain your obligations to this family." The climactic twist came when I walked up to my front door and tried to use my key. It didn't work. They had changed the locks on my own house and were refusing to give me the new keys. I stood there, locked out of the home I had just purchased that morning, while my family made themselves comfortable inside. Standing on my own front porch, unable to enter the house I legally owned, I felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. My family watched me through the window, Derek holding up the new house keys and jangling them mockingly while my nephews pressed their faces against the glass. "Give me the keys to my house right now!" I demanded, pounding on the door. Janet opened the door just wide enough to stick her head out, holding her smartphone. "Connor, you need to calm down. You're scaring the children with your violent behavior." "Violent?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I knocked on the door of my own house." "I have it all recorded," she said, waving the phone. "Your threatening language, your aggressive tone. The courts won't like seeing how you treat family." That's when I realized this wasn't some spontaneous decision made in desperation. This was a calculated, premeditated attack on my life and property. My mother had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. "Let me inside my house," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is Bethany's house now," Janet replied. "According to the lease agreement you signed, she has exclusive rights to the master bedroom and common areas. You're only entitled to basement access between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "For the record, I never signed any lease agreement. This family has broken into my house, changed the locks, and is now holding my property hostage." Janet smiled at my phone camera. "Connor has been struggling with memory issues lately," she said in a concerned voice. "We're worried about his mental health. He's been making threats against his sister's family and seems to have forgotten our arrangement completely." Derek appeared beside her also, speaking to my camera. "We have documented evidence of every agreement Connor made. Phone calls, text messages, witnesses. He promised to help us, and now he's trying to back out because he's embarrassed about living with family." I stopped recording and stepped back, my mind racing. They weren't just stealing my house. They were systematically destroying my credibility and reputation. Bethany came to the door carrying a tablet, her children clustered around her legs. "Connor, I want you to listen to this," she said, pressing play on what appeared to be a voice recording app. My own voice came through the speaker, slightly muffled but clearly audible. "Of course I want to help you guys out. The house has plenty of room and family should stick together. You can stay as long as you need to." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never said those words, but it was definitely my voice. "That's not possible," I whispered. "This is from our phone call 3 weeks ago," Bethany said, scrolling through what looked like a call log on her phone. "You called me specifically to offer the house after Derek lost his job." She played another clip. "Don't worry about rent or utilities. I make good money now and I don't mind taking care of family. The kids need stability." Again, my voice saying things I absolutely had never said. But the recording sounded genuine, not like the obvious computer-generated fakes you see in movies. "How are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Derek smirked. "Technology is amazing these days. You can edit audio files to make people say anything you want. Bethany's gotten really good at it." My sister's expression turned cold. "I prefer to think of it as preserving the spirit of what you meant to say, even if you didn't say it exactly that way." She showed me the tablet screen, which displayed a series of text message conversations between us. According to the timestamps, we had been discussing the housing arrangement for over a month. The messages showed me eagerly offering my house, discussing room arrangements, and even asking about the children's dietary restrictions so I could stock the refrigerator appropriately. I never sent these messages, I said. But even as I spoke, I could see how convincing they looked. The language sounded like me, the timing matched up with Derek's job loss, and the message thread was embedded in what appeared to be a legitimate conversation history. "Your phone records will show these messages," Bethany said matter-of-factly. "Because I sent them from your phone while you were sleeping last weekend when you stayed at Mom's house." I remembered that visit. I had been feeling guilty about not spending enough time with family, so I had agreed to stay overnight and help Frank fix his deck. My phone had been charging in the guest room all night. "You went through my phone and sent fake messages to yourself." "I sent real messages expressing your real feelings," she corrected. "You told us 100 times that you wanted to help family. I just made sure there was a record of it." Frank came back around from the U-Haul truck, wiping his hands on a dirty cloth. "Son, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We have witnesses who heard you make these promises. Your Uncle Robert, your cousin Lisa, even Mrs. Patterson from next door at your mom's house. They'll all testify that you talked about wanting to help Bethany and the kids." I tried to remember those conversations, but everything felt twisted and distorted. I had talked about wanting to help family in general terms, the way people do when they're trying to be supportive. But those conversations had been turned into specific commitments I never made. "This is illegal," I said desperately. "Forgery, fraud, breaking and entering." "What's illegal is trying to throw children out on the street after you promised them a home," Janet said primly. "What's illegal is backing out of a legal agreement because you changed your mind." A police car pulled up to the curb, and my heart leaped with hope, until I saw the expression on the officer's face when he got out. This wasn't someone responding to a crime report. This was someone who had been called here by my family. Officer Martinez approached us with a tired expression that suggested he had dealt with family disputes like this before. "We got a call about a disturbance at this address. Something about threats of violence and harassment." "Yes, officer," Janet said immediately, her voice taking on a trembling quality I had never heard before. "My son Connor has been making threats against his sister's family. He's trying to evict them from the house he agreed to let them live in, and he's been using very aggressive language around the children." Officer Martinez looked at me. "Is this your house, sir?" "Yes," I said quickly. "I just bought it this morning. I never agreed to let anyone live here, and they've changed the locks so I can't get inside." "Do you have documentation of the property ownership?" I pulled out the folder from my closing appointment, showing him the deed and mortgage paperwork. Officer Martinez examined them carefully. "The property is definitely yours," he said. "But do you have any kind of rental agreement or family arrangement with these people?" Bethany stepped forward with the forged lease agreement. "This is the signed contract we have with Connor. 2 years rent-free in exchange for family support and childcare assistance." Officer Martinez read through the document. "This appears to be legitimate. Has it been notarized?" "Right there." Derek pointed to an official-looking stamp and signature at the bottom of the page. I stared at the notary seal, recognizing the name. That's my cousin Marcus. He's not even a licensed notary. Actually, I am, said a voice from behind me. Marcus Williams walked up the driveway carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I got my commission last year specifically to help with family legal matters. The climactic twist hit me like a physical blow. Marcus handed Officer Martinez an official-looking document that appeared to be a police report filed 3 days earlier. According to the paperwork, I had been harassing Bethany's family, making threats about throwing them out of their home and showing increasingly erratic and violent behavior. Mr. Connor Williams has been calling his sister at all hours, threatening to make her children homeless, the report stated. He has demanded access to her residence despite being asked to stay away for the safety of the minors involved. The report was signed by Bethany and included statements from Derek and my parents, all swearing that I had been behaving in an unstable and threatening manner for weeks. I never harassed anyone, I said desperately. I didn't even know they were planning to move into my house until 20 minutes ago. Officer Martinez looked between the documents and my family's concerned faces. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property for tonight while this gets sorted out through the courts. This appears to be a civil matter involving a family dispute over housing arrangements. It's my house, I said, my voice cracking with desperation. I understand that, sir, but there's also a signed lease agreement and evidence of threatening behavior. You'll need to resolve this through the proper legal channels. As I walked back to my car, my family's satisfied expressions burned into my memory. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my sanity, my reputation, and my future. I spent that night in a cheap motel room staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened to my life in the span of 6 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek smirk as he held up the keys to my own house, or heard my mother's fake, concerned voice telling the police officer about my supposed mental health issues. The next morning, I drove to the law offices of Marcus Williams, my cousin, who had somehow become a licensed notary public without anyone in the family mentioning it. His office was in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a check cashing place, which should have been my first clue that his legal credentials might not be as impressive as his expensive suit suggested. Marcus greeted me with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. Connor, I'm sorry things got so heated yesterday. I know this is a difficult situation for everyone involved. You notarized a forged document, I said without preamble. That lease agreement is fake and you know it. He gestured for me to sit down in a chair across from his desk, which was covered with official-looking legal documents and law books that appeared to have never been opened. Now, Connor, I need you to understand something about family law, Marcus said in a condescending tone. When you make verbal agreements with family members, especially regarding housing arrangements for minor children, those agreements carry significant legal weight even without formal documentation. He opened a thick binder and started flipping through pages of legal text. Colorado has very specific laws about adverse possession tenant rights and family housing disputes. Your sister's family has established residency in that house based on your invitation and agreement. I never invited them, I said firmly. We have recordings of you doing exactly that, Marcus replied smoothly. We have witnesses who heard you make those promises. We have text messages from your own phone confirming the arrangement. And most importantly, we have your signature on a lease agreement that clearly outlines the terms. He slid the forged document across the desk toward me. Now I understand you might be having second thoughts about the arrangement. That's perfectly normal. But you can't simply evict a family with children without proper notice and legal justification. I studied my supposed signature more closely. It was a nearly perfect match for my handwriting, but something about the pen pressure looked wrong. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Connor, I think the stress of home ownership and family obligations is affecting your perception of events. No one is planning anything against you. We're just trying to help a family in need while respecting everyone's legal rights." He pulled out another document from his binder. "This is a notice of intent to establish adverse possession. If your sister's family continues living in that house for 18 months, they can legally claim ownership rights based on your abandonment of the property." I felt like the room was spinning. "Abandonment, I just bought the house yesterday." "But you're not living in it," Marcus pointed out. "You've allowed another family to establish primary residence there. In the eyes of the law, that could constitute abandonment of your homestead rights." He showed me more paperwork, each document more official and intimidating than the last. There were tenant protection filings, child welfare concerns about housing stability, and even a psychological evaluation request based on my supposed erratic behavior. "The family court system takes a very dim view of adults who use housing as leverage against children," Marcus continued. "If this goes to court, and Bethany's family can demonstrate that you promised them stable housing, and then reneged on that promise, you could be looking at significant financial penalties." My phone buzzed with a text message from my boss at the software company where I worked as a senior developer. "Connor, we need to talk. Please come in as soon as possible." I showed Marcus the message. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," he said innocently. "But your mother was very concerned about your mental state yesterday. She called your employer to let them know you might need some time off to deal with family stress and psychological issues." I stood up abruptly. "You people are destroying my life." "Sit down, Connor," Marcus said firmly. "Let me explain how this is going to work. Your sister's family is going to continue living in that house while Derek looks for employment. You're going to honor the lease agreement you signed, which includes paying all utilities and maintenance costs. And you're going to get the psychological help you clearly need to deal with these anger and control issues." He slid a business card across the desk. "Dr. Helen Morrison specializes in family therapy and stress-related disorders. She's expecting your call." I picked up the card and noticed it had yesterday's date written on the back in my mother's handwriting. "You scheduled a therapy appointment for me. Your family is concerned about you," Marcus said. "The threatening behavior, the memory issues, the inability to honor your commitments. These are all signs of someone who needs professional help." My phone rang and I saw it was my sister calling. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Connor, where are you?" Bethany's voice sounded frantic. "The kids are asking for their Uncle Connor, and Derek needs help moving the washer and dryer into the utility room." "It's not your utility room," I said through gritted teeth. "Don't start with that again," she replied tiredly. "Marcus explained the legal situation to you, right? You can come home anytime you want to apologize and start acting like family again." "Come home, it's my house." "It's our house now," Bethany said matter-of-factly. "The lease agreement makes that very clear, but there's plenty of room for everyone if you stop being selfish about it." After I hung up, Marcus handed me a stack of papers. "These are copies of all the legal documents related to your family housing situation. I strongly recommend you review them with a clear head and consider what's best for everyone involved, especially the children." As I walked out of his office, I noticed a framed certificate on the wall that I had missed on my way in. Marcus Williams, Notary, Public State of Colorado. The effective date was 2 weeks ago. They had planned this down to the smallest detail. When I arrived at my office, my manager David Chen called me into his conference room immediately. David was usually a laid-back guy who cared more about code quality than office drama, so his serious expression put me on edge. "Connor, I got a very concerning phone call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother," he said, closing the door behind us. "She told me you've been having some kind of mental health crisis related to family stress and housing issues." "It's not a mental health crisis," I said quickly. "My family broke into my house and forged legal documents to steal my property." David's expression grew more concerned. "She also mentioned that you've been making threats against family members and that there might be police involvement." I realized how insane my story sounded from the outside. A successful software engineer claiming his family had conspired to steal his house, using forged documents and fake recordings. It sounded like the delusions of someone having a psychological breakdown. David, I need you to know that everything my mother told you is a lie, I said carefully. My family is trying to manipulate the situation to make me look unstable so they can justify stealing my property. Connor, I want to help you, David said gently. But the company has to protect itself too. If there are police reports and family court issues involving threats and harassment, we need to make sure that doesn't affect your work or the safety of other employees. He slid a piece of paper across the table. I'm putting you on administrative leave for 2 weeks while you get this situation resolved. It's paid leave and your job will be here when you get back. But I need documentation from a mental health professional that you're stable and not a threat to anyone. The climactic twist came when I checked my email and found messages from 3 different banks. Someone had attempted to take out a home equity loan against my house using forged documents and my stolen identity. The loan applications were for $40,000 each, and one of them had already been approved and funded. My house, which I had owned for exactly 24 hours, was now at risk of foreclosure because of fraudulent loans taken out in my name. The money had been transferred to an account registered to Derek Williams, my sister's husband. They weren't just stealing my house. They were systematically destroying my financial future, my career, and my reputation, all while making it look like I was the one having a mental breakdown. Sitting in my car outside my office building, suspended from my job, and potentially facing financial ruin, I realized I had been approaching this situation all wrong. My family had spent weeks or months planning their attack on my life, and I had been reacting emotionally instead of strategically. It was time to fight back with the same level of calculation and preparation they had used against me. My first call was to Patricia Williams, a real estate attorney I found through an online search who specialized in property fraud and family disputes. Her office was in downtown Denver, and she agreed to see me immediately when I explained the urgency of my situation. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 40s, with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she had seen every possible way people could manipulate the legal system. Her office walls were covered with framed newspaper articles about high-profile fraud cases she had won. Mr. Williams, she said after I finished explaining my situation, what your family has done constitutes multiple felonies: document forgery, identity theft fraud, conspiracy, and potentially extortion. This isn't a family dispute. This is organized crime. She examined the forged lease agreement with a magnifying glass. The signature analysis alone will prove this is fake. But more importantly, the notary seal is fraudulent. Your cousin Marcus may have gotten a notary license, but notarizing a document that he knows contains forged signatures is a criminal act that will cost him his license and potentially land him in prison. Can we get my house back? We can do better than that, Patricia said grimly. We're going to file criminal charges against everyone involved and sue them for damages that will ruin them financially for the rest of their lives. She handed me a list of things I needed to do immediately. First, we're filing for an emergency restraining order and property recovery order. Second, we're reporting the identity theft to all 3 credit agencies and freezing your accounts. Third, we're having the fraudulent loans investigated by the Bank Fraud Division of the FBI. While Patricia prepared the legal paperwork, I drove to an electronics store and purchased a sophisticated security camera system that could be installed remotely and monitored from my phone. If my family wanted to play games with fake recordings and fabricated evidence, I was going to capture real evidence of their criminal behavior. My next stop was to visit my college roommate, Brian McKenzie, who now ran a successful private investigation business. Brian had always been the smartest person I knew, and he specialized in cases involving corporate fraud and digital evidence analysis. Ah, Connor. This is some next-level family drama, Brian said after I explained the situation. But you're in luck. I've got the equipment to prove those audio recordings are fake, and more importantly, I can trace the digital footprints of how they were created. He showed me into his office, which looked like something out of a spy movie with multiple computer screens and sophisticated audio analysis equipment. Voice synthesis technology has gotten really good in recent years, Brian explained, but it still leaves digital artifacts that can be detected with the right software. If your sister used an app or online service to create those fake recordings, I'll be able to prove it. Brian also offered to conduct a full background investigation on Derek, my sister's husband. If he's desperate enough to commit fraud against family members, chances are good he has other skeletons in his closet that we can use as leverage. While Brian worked on the technical analysis, I contacted the mortgage company that had approved the fraudulent home equity loan. The fraud department was very interested to hear that the loan application had been submitted using forged documents and stolen identity information. "Mr. Williams, we take mortgage fraud very seriously," the investigator told me. "If someone used your identity to obtain a loan against your property without your knowledge or consent, that's a federal crime. We'll be freezing that account immediately and referring this to our criminal investigation unit." I also called the other two banks where loan applications had been submitted in my name. Both institutions confirmed that the applications contained identical forged signatures and fabricated income documentation. The scope of the fraud was becoming clear, and it was much larger than just my house. That evening I drove back to my house under cover of darkness and carefully installed wireless security cameras around the perimeter of the property. The cameras were small enough to be hidden in landscaping and weather-resistant with motion detection and audio recording capabilities. If my family wanted to continue their fraud, I was going to document every conversation, every admission of guilt, and every piece of evidence that would send them to prison. My phone buzzed with a text message from Bethany. "Connor, the kids miss you. Why don't you come home for dinner? Derek is grilling burgers and we can talk about this like adults." I smiled for the first time in 2 days. They had no idea what was coming for them. The next morning, Patricia called with updates on the legal proceedings. The emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I've presented evidence of the forged documents, the identity theft, and the fraudulent loan applications. The judge is not happy. "What about the restraining order?" "Approved," Patricia said with satisfaction. "Your family will be served with eviction notices this afternoon, and they have 72 hours to vacate your property. If they refuse, the sheriff's department will remove them by force." But the real breakthrough came when Brian called with results from his investigation into Derek's background. "Connor, your brother-in-law is a career criminal," Brian said excitedly. "He has convictions for check fraud, credit card theft, and identity theft going back 15 years. He served 2 years in state prison for running a mortgage fraud scheme that targeted elderly homeowners. My family knew about this. That's the interesting part," Brian continued. "According to court records, your mother, Janet Williams, posted bail for Derek 3 years ago when he was arrested for welfare fraud. Your family has been enabling his criminal behavior for years." The climactic twist came when Brian's audio analysis revealed that the fake recordings of my voice hadn't been created using consumer-grade software. They had been professionally produced using expensive voice synthesis equipment that was typically only available to law enforcement or major corporations. Whoever made these recordings had access to high-end voice cloning technology, Brian explained. This wasn't some amateur job with a phone app. Someone with serious technical skills and expensive equipment created these fake audio files specifically to frame you. As I hung up the phone, I realized my family's conspiracy was even more sophisticated and premeditated than I had imagined. They had been planning this attack on my life for much longer than a few weeks, and they had professional help. But now I had professional help too, and unlike my family's criminal conspiracy, my counterattack was going to be completely legal and absolutely devastating. The next morning, I positioned myself in my car across the street from my house, with a clear view of the front door, waiting for the sheriff's deputies to serve the eviction notices. My hidden security cameras were already capturing audio and video of my family's daily activities, and the evidence was more damning than I had hoped for. Through my phone app, I had watched Derek coaching my 9-year-old nephews on what to say if police officers asked them questions. "Remember, Uncle Connor promised you could live here forever," Derek told them, "and he gets really angry and scary when people ask him about it." I had also recorded my mother, Janet, on a phone call with someone, presumably another family member, where she laughed about how easy it had been to fool the police officers. "Connor was so upset he could barely speak," she said. "The cops definitely thought he was having some kind of breakdown. At 10:30 in the morning, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up to my house and walked to the front door. I could hear the conversation through my wireless cameras as Deputy Thompson read the eviction notice aloud. "By order of the court, you are required to vacate this property within 72 hours. This property has been determined to be illegally occupied through fraudulent documentation." My sister Bethany appeared at the door holding my 7-year-old niece, Emma. "There must be some mistake, officer. We have a legal lease agreement with the property owner." "Ma'am, the lease agreement you provided has been determined to be fraudulent," Deputy Thompson explained patiently. "The signatures were forged and the notary seal was improperly applied. You need to gather your belongings and find alternative housing." Derek pushed past Bethany, his face red with anger. "This is harassment. We have rights as tenants and we have children living here. You can't just throw us out on the street." "Sir, you were never legal tenants," the second deputy, Officer Rodriguez, explained. "You broke into this house and changed the locks without the owner's permission. That constitutes criminal trespass and burglary." Through my camera feed, I watched my father Frank emerge from the house, with what appeared to be legal documents. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My son Connor has been struggling with mental health issues, and we're just trying to help stabilize the family situation." Deputy Thompson examined the papers Frank handed him. "Sir, these appear to be the same fraudulent documents that were submitted to the court yesterday. Attempting to use known forged documents to deceive law enforcement officers is a serious crime." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with my family becoming increasingly desperate and aggressive as they realized their fake documentation wasn't going to work anymore. Derek made several veiled threats about calling their lawyer, while Janet tried to manipulate the officers by claiming they were traumatizing the children. But the real breakthrough came when my hidden cameras captured a conversation between Bethany and Derek after the deputies left. They thought they were speaking privately in my backyard, but my audio equipment picked up every word. "We need to get out of here before they figure out about the other loans," Derek said urgently. "If they trace those bank accounts back to us, we're looking at federal charges." "How much did you take total?" Bethany asked. $120,000 across 4 different banks, Derek replied, "plus the 40 grand from the home equity loan that already cleared. We've got enough to disappear for a while if we need to." "What about Marcus? He's going to panic when the cops start investigating his notary seal." "Marcus knew exactly what he was signing up for," Derek said coldly. "He's been helping us with these kinds of deals for 2 years. He's not going to rat us out because we have too much dirt on his other clients." I immediately forwarded this recording to Patricia and Brian, along with several hours of other incriminating audio I had captured over the past 24 hours. The evidence clearly showed that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing criminal enterprise involving multiple family members. Brian called me within an hour of receiving the recordings. "Connor, this is incredible evidence. Not only does it prove they defrauded you, but it also proves they've been running similar scams against other people. The federal prosecutors are going to love this." "Federal prosecutors? Bank fraud across state lines becomes a federal crime," Brian explained. "And if they've been doing this to multiple victims over several years, we're talking about organized racketeering charges. Your family could be looking at decades in federal prison." That afternoon, Patricia arranged a meeting with Special Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. Agent Collins was a serious woman in her 30s who specialized in family-based fraud schemes, and she was very interested in the evidence we had gathered. "Mr. Williams, what you've uncovered appears to be a sophisticated criminal organization that has been operating for several years," Agent Collins said, after reviewing our documentation. The voice synthesis equipment alone suggests they have significant financial backing and technical expertise. She showed me a file containing information about similar cases. We've been tracking a pattern of family-based property fraud across Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. The perpetrators target successful family members, forge documents to steal their property, and then use intimidation and manipulation to prevent the victims from reporting the crimes. How many victims? At least 12 that we know of, Agent Collins said grimly. Your case is the first time we've gotten solid evidence of how the scheme works, because you're the first victim who fought back effectively. The climactic twist came when Agent Collins revealed that my cousin Marcus wasn't just a notary public who had gotten involved in family fraud. He was a central figure in a multi-state criminal network that specialized in real estate fraud, identity theft, and mortgage scams. Marcus Williams has been under federal investigation for 8 months, Agent Collins explained. We believe he's been using his notary license to legitimize fraudulent documents for dozens of criminal schemes. Your family's attack on you was just one operation in a much larger criminal enterprise. She showed me surveillance photos of Marcus meeting with people I didn't recognize, along with financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in suspicious transactions flowing through his business accounts. We think your family was recruited by Marcus specifically because you were a high-value target. Agent Collins continued, successful single with significant assets and family connections that could be exploited. As I sat in that FBI office looking at evidence of my family's betrayal and criminal conspiracy, I felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. I had been right about everything, but discovering the full scope of their deception was more painful than I had anticipated. However, I also felt something else, the satisfaction of knowing that justice was finally coming for the people who had tried to destroy my life. The coordinated law enforcement response began at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after my family had first broken into my house. I watched from my car as FBI agents, local police, and sheriff's deputies surrounded my property with tactical precision that suggested months of planning. Special Agent Collins had warned me this was coming, but seeing it happen felt surreal. My house, which had been my dream home for exactly 8 days, had become the center of a federal criminal investigation. Derek answered the door in his pajamas, his face going white when he saw the badges and search warrants. Behind him, I could see my nephews peeking around the corner, confused and frightened by the sudden invasion of law enforcement officers. Derek Williams, you're under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and racketeering, Agent Collins announced as 2 agents moved to handcuff him. You have the right to remain silent. My sister Bethany emerged from the master bedroom carrying my niece Emma, who was crying from all the commotion. What's happening? Why are you arresting my husband? Ma'am, we have warrants for your arrest as well, Agent Collins said gently but firmly. Bethany Williams, you're being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The next few minutes were chaotic as my parents arrived from wherever they had been staying and were immediately taken into custody as well. Frank kept shouting about constitutional rights and illegal searches, while Janet alternated between tears and threats to call every lawyer she knew. What struck me most was watching my nephews and niece during this nightmare. They clung to each other in the living room, supervised by a social services worker who had arrived with the law enforcement team. The children had no idea why their parents and grandparents were being arrested, and their confused faces reminded me that they were victims in this situation too. Marcus arrived at the scene just as the FBI agents were loading my family into patrol cars. He took one look at the federal vehicles and the search warrant tape across the front door and immediately tried to run. 2 agents tackled him in my driveway before he made it 10 feet, and I could hear him screaming about his constitutional rights as they read him his charges. Marcus Williams, you're under arrest for operating a criminal enterprise, fraud, forgery, and money laundering, one of the agents announced. We also have warrants to search your office, your home, and all business accounts associated with Williams Legal Services. Officer Martinez, The same police officer who had originally dismissed my complaints as a family dispute approached my car as I watched the arrests unfold. "Mr. Williams, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "When we responded to your initial call, everything your family presented looked legitimate. We had no way of knowing we were looking at sophisticated forged documents and fabricated evidence." "I understand," I replied, though part of me was still angry about being treated like the problem when I had been the victim. "They were very convincing." "The FBI briefed us on the investigation this morning," Officer Martinez continued. "What your family did to you was part of a criminal scheme that's been operating across multiple states for years. You weren't their first victim, but because you fought back, you're probably going to be their last." As the patrol cars drove away with my family in handcuffs, Agent Collins approached me with a clipboard full of paperwork. "Mr. Williams will need you to do a walk-through of the property to document anything that's been damaged or stolen," she said. "We'll also need you to provide detailed statements about your interactions with each family member and any evidence of their criminal behavior." The walk-through of my house was both heartbreaking and infuriating. My family had not only stolen my property, but they had systematically destroyed or damaged anything that represented my personal success or happiness. My expensive electronics had been sold according to online sales records the FBI recovered from Derek's phone. My furniture had been moved to the garage and damaged by moisture and pests. My personal photographs and mementos had been thrown away or destroyed, apparently out of spite, rather than any practical purpose. But the most disturbing discovery was in my home office, which my family had converted into a bedroom for my nephews. Hidden behind the dresser, FBI agents found a detailed notebook containing information about other potential fraud victims. The list included names, addresses, financial information, and personal details about dozens of my relatives, co-workers, and friends. "Your family was planning to expand their operation," Agent Collins explained. "This notebook contains target profiles for future fraud schemes, including detailed information about people's assets, family relationships, and psychological vulnerabilities." I recognized names of people I cared about scattered throughout the notebook. My co-workers at the software company, my neighbors from my apartment complex, even my college friends who had attended my housewarming party that I had planned but never got to host. "They were going to do this to other people." "Based on the evidence we've recovered, your family has already victimized at least 18 people across 4 states, Agent Collins said grimly. "The financial damages total over $2.4 million, and several victims lost their homes, their retirement savings, or their businesses." The scope of my family's criminal enterprise was staggering. They had been running sophisticated fraud schemes for at least 3 years, targeting successful family members, friends, and acquaintances with carefully planned attacks designed to steal property, drain bank accounts, and destroy lives. Judge Rebecca Martinez, who presided over the emergency hearing that afternoon, was clearly disgusted by the evidence presented against my family. "In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated and heartless betrayal of family trust," Judge Martinez said as she reviewed the charges. The defendants not only committed serious felonies against their own relative, but they attempted to manipulate this court system with fraudulent evidence and perjured testimony. She denied bail for all 5 defendants, citing the multi-state nature of their crimes and the significant flight risk posed by their access to stolen funds. Mr. Derek Williams, Mrs. Bethany Williams, Mrs. Janet Williams, Mr. Frank Williams, and Mr. Marcus Williams will remain in federal custody pending trial, Judge Martinez announced. The evidence suggests they pose a continuing danger to the community and have both the means and motivation to flee prosecution. The climactic twist came during the afternoon court session when federal prosecutors revealed that 3 other families had come forward after seeing news reports about my case. Each family had experienced similar fraud schemes involving forged documents, fake recordings, and manipulation by trusted relatives. Your Honor, the Williams criminal enterprise appears to have victimized at least 21 families across 6 states, the federal prosecutor announced. The total financial damages now exceed $4.7 million, and we believe there may be additional victims who haven't yet come forward. One of those families was my own extended relatives. My Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda had lost their retirement home in Wyoming to a similar scheme, orchestrated by Marcus and my parents 2 years earlier. They had been too ashamed and confused to report it to authorities, thinking it was a legitimate family financial arrangement that had gone wrong. Another victim was Mrs. Patterson, my mother's elderly neighbor, who had signed over power of attorney to Janet after being convinced she was suffering from dementia. My mother had used that power of attorney to mortgage Mrs. Patterson's house and steal over $100,000 from her savings accounts. As I left the courthouse that evening, knowing my family would be spending months or years in federal prison, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was relief that justice was finally being served, vindication that I had been right to fight back, and satisfaction that their criminal enterprise had been permanently shut down. But there was also sadness about the children who were now in state custody, anger about the years of my life they had tried to steal, and a deep sense of loss about the family relationships that could never be repaired. Most importantly, though, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks' peace. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew I was safe. My property was secure, and the people who had tried to destroy my life could never hurt me again. 6 months after my family was arrested, I stood in my completely renovated home office, looking out the window at my backyard, where I was hosting a barbecue for the support group I had started for family fraud victims. The laughter of children playing on the swing set I had installed mixed with the conversations of adults who had found healing through shared experience and mutual support. The legal aftermath had been swift and decisive. Derek received 8 years in federal prison for his role as the ringleader of the fraud scheme. Bethany got 6 years for conspiracy and forgery. My parents each received 4 years, though my father Frank's sentence was reduced slightly when he agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators and testify against Marcus. Marcus, the architect of the entire criminal enterprise, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all victims. His notary license was permanently revoked, and his law practice was shut down permanently. The most satisfying moment of the entire legal process came when the judge ordered the seizure of all assets obtained through criminal activity. The court recovered nearly $3 million in stolen money property and fraudulent loans, which was distributed among the 27 victims they had identified across 6 states. But more meaningful than the financial recovery was the relationships I had built during the investigation and trial process. Patricia Williams, the attorney who had saved my life and property, had become not just a legal advisor, but a trusted friend who helped me understand how to protect myself from future manipulation. Brian McKenzie, my college roommate turned private investigator, had used the evidence from my case to launch a successful consulting business helping other fraud victims. We had become business partners, with me providing technical expertise for digital fraud investigation, while he handled the traditional detective work. The most unexpected relationship, however, was with Sarah Collins, the FBI agent who had led the investigation. After the trial concluded, we began dating, drawn together by shared values about justice and protecting vulnerable people from predators. "Connor, the steaks are ready," Sarah called from the back deck, where she was manning the grill for our monthly support group gathering. She had become an expert at cooking for large groups since our gatherings had grown from just me and one other victim to over 15 families who met regularly to share experiences and provide mutual support. The support group had evolved into something much larger than I had originally envisioned. We had created a non-profit organization called Family Fraud Recovery Network, which provided resources, legal referrals, and emotional support for people whose trust had been betrayed by relatives. Patricia served on our board of directors, helping us connect victims with competent legal representation. Brian provided pro bono investigation services for families who couldn't afford professional help. And Sarah, when her FBI duties permitted shared insights about recognizing and preventing fraud schemes. One of our most successful programs was our Children's Counseling Initiative. I had never forgotten the confused faces of my nephews and niece during their parents' arrest, and I was determined to help children who had been victimized by family fraud schemes. My nephews Jake and Tyler, now 11 years old, visited me every other weekend as part of a supervised arrangement through social services. Their sister Emma, now 9, came with them, and all 3 children were receiving professional therapy to help them understand that their parents' criminal behavior was not their fault. "Uncle Connor, can we play video games after everyone goes home?" Tyler asked, running up to me with grass stains on his knees from playing soccer with the other children. "Of course," I said, hugging him carefully. It had taken months of therapy for all of us to rebuild any kind of relationship, and I was still learning how to be a positive presence in their lives without replacing the parents who had betrayed them. The children were living with foster families who had been specially trained to deal with family trauma, and while the situation was far from ideal, they were finally safe and receiving the stability they had never gotten from their biological parents. Derek, serving his prison sentence in a federal facility in Colorado, had requested to speak with me several times through his attorney. I had declined every request, having no interest in hearing his apologies or explanations. Some bridges once burned could never be rebuilt. Bethany had written me letters from prison, alternating between taking responsibility for her actions and blaming everyone else for the consequences of her choices. I read the first few letters hoping to find some genuine remorse or understanding, but eventually stopped opening them when it became clear she was still trying to manipulate me even from prison. My parents' situation was more complex. Frank, my father, had shown genuine remorse during his cooperation with federal investigators. He had provided detailed information about how the criminal scheme operated and had expressed sincere regret about the damage they had caused to innocent victims. After 18 months in federal prison, Frank was released to a halfway house program where he was required to work full-time and attend counseling sessions focused on understanding the impact of financial crimes on families. He had asked to meet with me to apologize, and after months of consideration and discussions with my therapist, I had agreed to supervised visits. "Son, I know I can never undo what we did to you," Frank had said during our first meeting. "I let your mother and Marcus convince me that we were helping family, but I knew in my heart that what we were doing was wrong. I was too much of a coward to stand up to them." Those meetings were still ongoing, and while I hadn't forgiven him completely, I could see that he was genuinely trying to become a better person. Whether we would ever have a real relationship again remained to be seen, but I was willing to keep the door open for supervised contact. My mother, Janet, on the other hand, had shown no remorse whatsoever. She maintained that everything she had done was justified because family should help family, and she blamed me for destroying the family by involving law enforcement. I had no contact with her and no intention of changing that decision. Marcus continued to file appeals and legal motions from prison, still trying to manipulate the system even after his conviction. His appeals were consistently denied, and his attempts to contact me through various channels were blocked by restraining orders. The house itself had been completely renovated and redecorated. I had replaced everything my family had damaged or contaminated with their presence, creating spaces that felt safe and peaceful rather than tainted by their criminal behavior. The home office where I now worked as an independent consultant had become a symbol of my recovery and success. The walls were covered with certificates recognizing my contributions to fraud prevention education photographs from support group events, and letters of gratitude from families we had helped through the nonprofit. But the most meaningful addition to my home was the framed photograph on my desk of Sarah and me at a fraud prevention conference where we had presented our research about family-based financial crimes. We had been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences across the country, helping train investigators to recognize the warning signs of family fraud schemes. "Dr. Connor, everyone's asking about your scholarship program announcement," Patricia said, joining me in the office. "Are you ready to make it official?" I nodded, picking up the microphone connected to the outdoor sound system I had installed for these gatherings. The Connor Williams Family Fraud Recovery Scholarship was something I had been planning for months, using a portion of the restitution money I had recovered to help other victims rebuild their lives. Friends and fellow survivors, I said, addressing the group gathered in my backyard. 6 months ago, I thought my life had been destroyed by people I trusted most. I felt isolated, betrayed, and hopeless about the future. I looked around at the faces of people who had experienced similar betrayals and found the strength to rebuild their lives. But today, I'm surrounded by some of the strongest, most resilient people I've ever met. People who refused to let family betrayal define their futures. The applause was warm and genuine, reflecting the bonds we had formed through shared struggle and mutual support. That's why I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Connor Williams Family Fraud Recovery Scholarship Fund. I continued. This fund will provide educational opportunities, legal assistance, and counseling support for young people whose lives have been disrupted by family financial crimes. The scholarship would help children like my nephews and niece, along with dozens of other young victims we had identified through our support network. The goal was to break the cycle of family dysfunction and give these children opportunities to build healthy, productive lives despite the trauma they had experienced. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, I stood on my deck looking at the home I had fought so hard to protect and reclaim. The house that had started as a symbol of my success had become something much more meaningful, a sanctuary for healing and a base for helping others. Sarah joined me on the deck, leaning against the railing as we watched the last of our guests drive away. "Any regrets about fighting back so hard?" She asked a question she had posed several times over the months as we had grown closer. "None," I said without hesitation. If I had given in to their manipulation, they would still be out there victimizing other families. Every day they spent in prison was a day some other family was safe from their schemes. "What about the family relationships? Do you ever miss having that connection?" I thought about the question seriously, as I always did when Sarah asked it. "I miss the idea of having family," I said finally. "I miss the fantasy that those people actually cared about me, but I don't miss the reality of who they actually were." I gestured toward the backyard, where children had been playing just an hour earlier. "This is my family now. People who chose to be part of my life because they value honesty, respect, and mutual support. People who would never dream of betraying the trust I've placed in them." 6 months later, I received word that my nephew Tyler had been accepted to a prestigious private school on a full scholarship funded by our non-profit. His essay about overcoming family trauma and choosing to break the cycle of dysfunction had moved the admissions committee to tears. Emma had been adopted by her foster family, who loved her unconditionally and were providing the stable home she had never experienced with her biological parents. She still visited me regularly, and we had developed a relationship based on trust and genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. Jake was thriving in a specialized program for children affected by family trauma, showing remarkable resilience and a gift for helping other young victims process their experiences. All 3 children knew the truth about their parents' crimes, explained to them in age-appropriate ways by professional counselors. Rather than being damaged by that knowledge, They had found strength in understanding that they were not responsible for their parents' choices, and that they could choose different paths for their own lives. The Family Fraud Recovery Network had grown to include over 200 families across 12 states, with professional chapters led by attorneys, investigators, and mental health professionals who specialized in family financial crimes. We had helped recover over $8 million in stolen assets and had provided support services to more than 300 children affected by family fraud schemes. I still worked as a software consultant, but my passion had become fraud prevention education and victim advocacy. The technical skills that had made me successful in my career now served a higher purpose, helping law enforcement agencies develop better tools for investigating financial crimes and helping families protect themselves from manipulation. Looking back on that terrifying week when my family tried to steal my life, I realized that their betrayal had ultimately led me to discover my true calling and my real family. The people who sat around my dinner table now were there because they chose to be, not because of blood relationships or family obligation. The most important lesson I had learned was that family is not defined by genetics or legal relationships, but by love, respect, and mutual support. True strength comes not from avoiding conflict with toxic people, but from having the courage to protect yourself and others from those who would abuse your trust. My house, once threatened by criminal conspiracy, had become a symbol of justice, recovery, and hope. Every month as we gathered to support new victims and celebrate the healing of others, I was reminded that choosing to fight back against injustice, even when it means standing alone against those who should love you most, was the most important decision I had ever made. What would you have done if your own family tried to steal your home and destroy your life? How do you think someone should balance family loyalty with protecting themselves from criminal behavior? Leave a comment below, and let me know your thoughts on this situation. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal, and share this with someone who might need to hear about the importance of setting boundaries with toxic relatives. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. Stay strong, protect yourself, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve to be treated with anything less than respect and honesty.